Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me. Tell me what you want, what you need. Tell me, tell me, tell me.
Today I'm talking about the future of Star Trek. A little bit about its past and of course its present also. Star Trek is of course one of science fiction's most popular franchises, and at least a part of the reason why there's been so much talk about the future of Star Trek is partly due to the current status of two of its most recent live action TV shows, Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery. A couple of weeks ago, we saw the final episode being broadcast of the always planned to be 3-season run of Star Trek Picard. A final goodbye, the final adventures of Jean-Luc Picard, and as we saw in that final season, the crew of the Next Generation. Around the time of the penultimate episode, we also heard the news that Star Trek Discovery will not only have its 5th season delayed until next year, but that season 5 will also be its last. So those are the status of the two shows that have really carried Star Trek for the last couple of years. And I will say, I enjoyed Picard. I thought it was a good show. I thought it was fantastic. We got to see the iteration of Star Trek that I grew up with, the Next Generation, their ability to say goodbye. I thought that was a great thing to see. I enjoyed Discovery. I think the first 2 seasons were the better seasons than seasons 3 and 4. I do look forward to watching season 5, and it is a bit of a shame that it will end after season 5. But I will say, looking at a lot of stuff online over the past couple of weeks since this announcement was made, it does certainly seem that the lifespan of a television show now seems to be around about that 5-year mark, rather than just a few years ago it would sit around about 7 years. It's certainly, for whatever reason, whether that's to do with the pandemic situation or whatever, the lifespan of a television show seems to have gone down on average from 7 seasons to 5. So those are the two status of Star Trek Picard, which was always only intended to be 3 seasons, and Star Trek Discovery. This means that Strange New Worlds, the series starring Anson Mount as Captain Christopher Pike, which will premiere its 2nd season around June 15th in various different territories and countries around the world, will be the main Star Trek live action TV show, certainly for the next couple of years that I can see. Certainly this year, 2023, 2024, and potentially beyond. I genuinely look forward to watching that 2nd season. I think it is finding its feet. I thought it's a good show. I really enjoyed that 1st season. Look forward to seeing how the characters and situations develop in the 2nd season. I will also say that, again, with that 5-year lifespan, it will be good to see how they handle the Pike situation. We all know, and as is made very, very clear in the final episode, episode 10 of season 1, and I believe this will also 2nd season be another 10 episodes, that Pike cannot escape the accident that disables him. So I'm looking forward to seeing how in the future that is handled. Hopefully, if the show doesn't have the rug pulled from under it, and see how they handle that in the future. I believe there's it said in the show about 7 years until the incident happens in their timeline. So how they handle that going forward, what happens there, that will be, I think, a good judge of how the show eventually goes. But again, in the meantime, I really liked several aspects of the show. I'm not going to go into and give it a review, but I liked Strange New Worlds. Look forward to seeing season 2 in a couple of weeks' time. So that kind of deals with the present of Star Trek. And before I talk about the future, I want to quickly flip back a little bit into the past of Star Trek and into the centre seat. I use the term centre seat because the centre seat is the name of the Star Trek documentary series that I recently watched. Here in the UK, it's available on Amazon Prime on the Freevee section. If you just search for the centre seat, I'm sure you can find it. It's an 11 episode documentary series, 9 of which really are the documentary portion, with 1 episode about the ships of Star Trek and 1 about the actors' experience working on a Star Trek series. But both of those 2 episodes, I would say check them out as well. But this is a really, and I might overuse this phrase, but it's a really good in-depth look at the story and the history of Star Trek. And I know it's the history and story of Star Trek has been told a couple of times, and I don't know generally how official this documentary series is, but it does use a lot of footage and clips and stuff of Star Trek, so I'm assuming it's certainly somewhat official or somewhat rights lent to it anyway. But this is a really good series showing almost the entire history of Star Trek, from Gene Roddenberry's life and struggles, his struggles especially with Star Trek, getting it on the air, Lucille Ball's involvement, and right the way through to the creation, story and ending of Star Trek Enterprise. It really is a good documentary series. It's narrated by Gates McFadden, who plays Beverly Crusher. She and various different individuals, Armin Shiverman, I'm hoping I'm not getting these names so wrong, Cirroc Lifton, and Andrew Robertson or Garrison, I think, from Deep Space Nine. There's various different individuals, cast and crew, that appear throughout this documentary series, giving their insights into their experiences and their opinions on Star Trek. Like I said, it's very in-depth. It really, for 9 episodes, it covers a lot. It goes really, like I said, from Gene Roddenberry's creation of Star Trek, him getting it on the air, the story of the original series. It goes really in depth on that, into the stories of the motion pictures, their creation, the stories of what went on throughout their filming, including Kirstie Alley, who appears, who's recently passed away. Also, Leonard Nimoy appears through archive footage, and I would say, if you haven't, check out The Search for Spock, his son's documentary. That's a great one as well. But it really goes in depth on the original series, their motion picture journey, including how William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy ended up directing different movies in that series. It really goes in depth on their story. It also starts moving into the next generation. So there, again, like every one of those series, the casting and development of the series, to their story, of getting that crew together, the story, some of the discussion on some of the episodes involved in their run. It talks a little bit about their movies, doesn't go into as in-depth discussion in detail as the original series movies, which I think is a little bit of a shame. To be honest, like I said, it's my favourite iteration, and I actually enjoyed a few of the movies that they did So it's a little bit of a shame that's not covered, but again, I'm sure they've got limited amount of episodes here and they've got a lot to cover. So it does go into their movies a little bit, but then obviously it moves on to the stories, and I think it's What We Left Behind is the documentary series on Deep Space Nine, but it tells that story very well about, again, the cast and crew and development of Deep Space Nine, their journey into Voyager, again, the cast and crew, how Catherine Janeway came to be when she wasn't originally planned, and their story a little bit, and again, also the same, the cast crew development and some of the story of Star Trek Enterprise, which I have to go back and watch. It's not my favourite iteration of Star Trek. I do have to go back and watch it with a bit more of an open mind. And one of the great things about when they cover that last episode, certainly with the last episode when in terms of documentary portion, they talk about what could have happened going forward with not only with Star Trek Enterprise but with the UPN network, because again, one of the great things about this documentary series, we don't just hear about the casting, the crew and development and the story of all of these different series of Star Trek. We also get to hear a lot about what happened behind the scenes as well. Again, there's DC Fontana was her name, and various different members of the crew, including many of the writers involved in Star Trek from the beginning, from the original series to the animated series, which is also covered. Many of them tell about the stories and some of the politics and some of the management experiences of Star Trek. So it's not just the stuff that we saw on the screen, but a lot of what happened behind the scenes is also, I think, some of the really interesting portions of this documentary. There's a couple of involvements in people and situations that I don't think we get the full story of, but we certainly get to hear a lot about the struggles behind the scenes, even the behaviour and struggles and health issues of Gene Roddenberry, different management figures that come in and out of Star Trek within Paramount over the years, and Paramount's eventual takeover of Star Trek, and some of the special effects and makeup of, especially in the ship's episode, you hear a little bit more about the special effects and some stuff of the more production end of things. You do get to hear about that throughout the different episodes of this documentary series regarding, again, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, the original series, Next Generation, etc., Star Trek Enterprise. You get to hear a lot about what's happening behind the scenes, and the running of Star Trek as a whole with Rick Berman and others, especially during that 18-year period when it went from the Next Generation to Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise, and a bit of overkill, I think it was, a little bit in Star Trek in terms of the number of shows available, and that's what certainly with the indication that I get. Obviously, I'm in Scotland, and I even felt that a little bit. There was quite a number of shows on at the one time or overlapping each other. You do get that kind of feeling, but certainly during that, which was great, pretty good creative period, we get to hear a lot about, again, the production and management of Star Trek. And I think that's one thing I think some people watching this documentary will appreciate, is that production and running and management aspects of Star Trek, and some of the discussions and even the fallouts is very well documented about Leonard Nimoy and Paramount over rights issues. But there was also different discussions and different arguments happening as well that we hear a little bit about. So I think the curtain's pulled back to a satisfying degree on some of these series, and we get to hear about what it was like to run, to be a part of running the Star Trek ships, literally and figuratively, on some of these shows. So I think I would certainly recommend The Centre Seat. Again, I don't know how official it is in terms of Paramount, but certainly it is absolutely, a lot of footage and behind the scenes stuff is used, so I would certainly say there's some kind of relationship there, but it is really, because I'll be honest, some of the documentaries, they'll pay for a couple of former cast members to come in, and they'll use stills and photos instead of having the money and the budget or paying to get footage, which doesn't happen here. It's a really in-depth, really well presented, well edited, well put together documentary show telling the story of Star Trek. And finally, the future of Star Trek. Like I said earlier, Strange New Worlds is going to be the main live-action TV show for the next couple of years at least. But that doesn't mean that there aren't plans going forward for Star Trek. In fact, there's a couple of, a lot of it's rumour and speculation, but there are some plans seemingly that are being brought forward. One thing we do know for certain is that there will be a Section 31 movie starring Michelle Yeoh, who of course played Admiral Captain Giorgio. She is an award-winning actor who is extremely busy, so whether she would be able to commit to a particular series with this or not, I'm not sure. And of course, I think they might wait and to see what the reception is to this movie before they decide whether Section 31 is going to be a next series or not. Section 31, of course, is the secret, official, unofficial police of Starfleet. And it has been rumoured for many, many years that a series involving Section 31 or based around Section 31 would be made. They were featured in Star Trek series like Enterprise, Voyager, I think they'll maybe mentioned in Next Generation, but certainly, especially when Enterprise ended, a lot of people thought, well, that's going to be the next direction that Star Trek goes down, is using Section 31, which of course ultimately didn't happen. I look forward to seeing the movie. Hopefully it'll be good. Hopefully it'll involve the other gentleman who moved from being a crew member on Discovery to Section 31. I quite liked him. I can't remember what the actor's name is right now, but certainly looking forward to seeing that movie. And that is, again, been confirmed, but we will have to wait quite a while to see it. Another Star Trek series that is rumoured to be in some type of development, and again, it will be quite some time until we see anything from this, is one surrounding Starfleet Academy. Again, another really unexplored area of the Star Trek universe, to be honest. We've seen, of course, Starfleet Academy being used in various different ways. The Next Generation visited there a couple of times. Voyager even found an alien race that had recreated the Academy, including, I think it's Busby was his name, the elderly gardener. It's been explored. We know it's there. Obviously, it's been mentioned so many times. Of course, Will Wheaton's character went there. He got in trouble a couple of times there, but in terms of a kind of permanent series setting, it's not really been used. So I think that would be a great thing to see. Although, of course, as ever, there will be protests and protestations from some areas of Star Trek fans about the movie doing something a little bit different. But again, that's happened over the years. Even when they started to create the Next Generation, there were protests about that Star Trek should be Kirk, Spock and the Enterprise, even especially when they were starting to develop and produce Deep Space Nine. People were against that, which I actually really enjoyed Deep Space Nine. But certainly it is something that I think could be a really good series moving forward. There's a whole world, literally in universe and galaxy out there for the Starfleet Academy to explore. We all, we hear throughout the different series stories of the different courses that they do and the different experiences that they do, and as long as it doesn't become too overly collegey and academic thing, too much like almost like one of those college movies from the 1980s, like Animal House. As long as it's not too overtly like that, and a lot of it is kept about the experiences and development of the main characters and the surrounding characters, I think that could be a really good move for Star Trek. Again, an area that's not really been tremendously explored. The other potential series that I think a lot of people are wanting. So we have Section 31 movie confirmed. We have Starfleet Academy. Supposedly that's in some form of official development. But I think the series that a lot of people are clamouring to see, especially lately, is what everybody has termed as Star Trek Legacy. This is really the one live action series that a lot of people are trying to push for. I'm not sure about the actor who plays Raffi or the one that plays Jack Crusher, but certainly it seems that Jerry Ryan, 7 of 9, seems to be, just from what I've seen on her Twitter, she seems to be up for doing this series. But Star Trek Legacy, that seems to be the one that a lot of people are pushing for, and it seems certainly like it is a possibility. And this is a bit of a spoiler if people haven't seen it. At the end of Star Trek Picard, there's a couple of scenes. One where Raffi, 7 of 9, who's now the captain, and Jack Crusher take their place at the helm as executive officers of the USS Titan, which has been rechristened the USS Enterprise. There is also the scene where Jack Crusher is in his room and he is approached by John Delancey, who of course plays Q, or at least one of the Qs. And he is told by Q, Jack Crusher is told by Q, that his trials is just beginning. It's looking online, there seem to be several scenes and bits and pieces that Picard as a series wasn't able to do due to time or budget constraints, but this scene was done. And again, it may come to absolutely nothing, as a few bits and pieces have over the years, but certainly the potential for this Legacy series has whetted a lot of people's appetite. And I think actually the Legacy name, which I think comes from one of the video games or something that there was, does seem to fit very, very well into any series going forward, because there are multiple legacies involved. 7 of 9 and her legacy as a member of Voyager and what she's done since, Raffi and her life and what she's done, Jack Crusher, of course, as the son of Beverly Crusher and Jean-Luc Picard, one of the most legendary captains in Star Trek. There's that legacy, the family legacy, plus, of course, as I said, the USS Titan at the end of Picard gets rechristened Enterprise, so there is the legacy of that ship as well. So there's a huge amount of pressure on them as well to get things right, and we really saw at, I would say certainly season 1 particularly, obviously, of Picard, that 20 odd years has passed since the end of The Next Generation, and a lot of things have changed, as you'd expect. So there is a whole kind of slightly different universe to explore if they were to go ahead in terms of this Star Trek Legacy series. Especially after the likes of the events of Deep Space Nine, what has happened to the Ferengi? Where are they? The Klingons, what's happening to them? The Romulans, the Cardassians, the Bajorans. Lots of all of these kind of different places they could explore, adventures that they could have. The changelings, I don't think would stay and lick their wounds all the time. I think they would be one of the villains of that series. There's a huge potential for a kind of a modern day set series. And I don't mean modern day as in 2023. I'm talking about as continuation of Picard and where that left off. Because of course Strange New Worlds is a prequel series, of course, set before the time of Kirk's Enterprise. So there is a huge potential there to take advantage of some of the modern technology that we have to nowadays in 2023 to create that series. So I think that is certainly one series that, one thing that a lot of Star Trek fans are really wanting to see, or certainly a vocal selection of Star Trek fans are wanting to see that. And as I said there is certainly a lot of potential within that series going forward. Whether it's going to happen, obviously I don't know. I think it's going to be a couple of years until we see anything really develop, I think. And it all comes, of course, down to those in charge of Star Trek and Paramount in terms of what do they want to do with Star Trek going forward. It certainly seems that they don't want to kind of rest the franchise. They do want to push ahead with things, as long as they don't over-egg the pudding, as they say. I think, again, I know I just talked about it, but the Center Seat documentary, and I had this indication myself as well, even way before watching the documentary, the days that we had Voyager and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and that whole 18-year period where there was lots of continuous Star Trek series, some of them overlapping and being shown at the same time. I think it was a little bit of overkill in terms of Star Trek, and I think Star Trek benefited from there being a period of not really any Star Trek stuff out there, especially in terms of series. To rest the series at that time seemed a good idea, but I don't think that it's called for right now. I think there is certainly room for a couple of series of Star Trek, as long as they kind of space it out a little bit, pun not intended. I think there's plenty of room for more than one series, what I'm saying. So I think that is certainly something that could be looked at, and I think Paramount, especially Star Trek has supposedly been one of the most successful franchises for them. It's been really profitable for them over the years. I think that they do intend, like I said, to push forward with different Star Trek projects. So there is certainly plenty of scope for Star Trek to exist, and obviously you could make the arguments, and I'm not getting into it on this video, about Star Wars and its presence thanks to Disney and all these different series, Mandalorian, Boba Fett, etc., and them kind of really eating up, especially Disney with the Marvel stuff as well. You could include that in eating up the science fiction fantasy genre space, and maybe Paramount wanting a piece of that pie. There's that whole thing you could go into, but for me, I think there's certainly room for a couple, certainly more than one Star Trek series going on at the same time. Again, especially if they're careful with it and space it out and not have it overfilled and too many. Because one of the complaints in the documentary, obviously because I'm in Scotland, was that there was continual adverts, and adverts for Voyager and Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and all these kind of different series, and they were shown continuously. As long as they don't step over each other's toes too much, I think there's certainly room for Star Trek. And again, certainly, as I wrap this video up, there certainly seems to be a calling for more Star Trek from the fans and from Paramount. So I'm optimistic about Star Trek's future. I think that there is going to be movement in the next couple of years. I think we're going to see it over the next couple of years, certainly, in terms of where Star Trek heads. I think this is a good time for Star Trek, but it's also kind of a concerning time in a way, because, you know, with Discovery coming to an end, they have Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They will obviously want to make the next steps to be in the right direction. But certainly we are going to see more Star Trek going forward, which is always a good thing, and hopefully most of the management, Paramount and whoever's running Star Trek these days, will be very careful in what they do, where they take Star Trek. But overall, I think it's a good time to be a Star Trek fan. It's a good time to be very optimistic about the future of this franchise.